Today, only 2.5% of water on Earth is fresh water. Today, 10 million tons of waste is produced every 24 hours. Today, 50% of people live in cities. Tomorrow, we must ensure that 9 billion people have access to high-quality drinking water. We must give waste a second life, and we need to plan and develop sustainable societies together. Resources are not everlasting. What is everlasting is the audacity and the ingenuity of all. The resource revolution starts now. The resource revolution starts here. Are you ready?
Good morning, everyone. We welcome you. My name is Mike Schneider. We welcome you to the New York leg of this historic, truly historic day, the SUEZ Environment Resource Revolution Tour. Earlier this morning, some history was made in Paris as well, which I'll tell you about shortly. You might see throughout the room right now, there are television cameras here. They are here, in fact, because this event is being streamed throughout the world. If you happen to be watching at home, you can follow us on Twitter at #RRTour. But history was made this morning in Paris with some important news being shared. We, in turn, will share that news with you in just a moment, and then, in turn, pass it on to our colleagues in Beijing, some 7,000 miles away. But if you would please, for now, watch this.
Thank you. 4 billion tons of waste produced every single year. That's the number. 80% of electricity on planet Earth generated using fossil fuels. The volume of waste on planet Earth is going up the whole time. Greenhouse gases are accumulating. Global warming is with us, and it's fast-tracking. And global population is increasing too. Yes, there is a difficulty. How can we reconcile all this? Yes, but I would say that probably the problem is part of the solution.
There's one thing I'm certain about when it comes to this resource revolution, is that it's absolutely necessary for humankind. I'm convinced that although decisions may be strong, they may not be enough. Therefore, we, companies, must bring our forces together in order to move this resource revolution forward. I'm deeply convinced that we need to protect resources. I'm deeply convinced that we have to make the most of our waste. And if we are able to do that, we shall make the resource revolution sustainable. As we've all said, this revolution is global, it's circular, which is why within a few hours' time, the Resource Revolution Tour is going to move. It's going to go from Paris to New York. And then it will go to Beijing. Thank you.
So what is this resource revolution? In a way, it essentially is reimagining and reinventing the way that we view our vital resources and the way that we use them. The water that we drink, the air that's around us, the infrastructure that we rely upon each and every day, and perhaps our most vital resource of all, the human resource that we rely upon to power our economies each and every day. All of these things are under stress right now. SUEZ Environment has gathered some of our leading experts in this room to help us take a look at where we stand, where we are, where we could be going, where we must be going, in fact. The pressure is on to perform, and I think we have the ability, with the folks we have gathered in this room and the corporate commitment, to do precisely that. We've also amassed some outstanding thinkers, authors, political leaders, educational leaders to help take us in that direction as well, speakers that you'll be hearing from today. So without further ado, let's get started with that. Our first speaker is Andrew Winston. Andrew Winston has been advising leading corporations around the world for years on these subjects pertaining to what we now call the resource revolution. His first book, which is, most people write a first book and they think, can I sell this thing? Will anybody read this thing? This first book, Green into Gold, ended up on an extraordinary list, Inc. magazine's list, of the 30 most important books that business leaders should not only read, but should act upon. That's quite an accomplishment because other books, other titles include The Wealth of Nations and How to Win Friends and Influence People, books that have been around for a long time. But Mr. Winston now has followed that up with some other exceptional work. The latest book is called The Big Pivot, and it really focuses on what we need to be doing and how we can take the challenges that exist right now, the crisis that exists right now, and use it to transform business and to empower customers at the very same time, to take this crisis and turn it into an opportunity. So now to talk more about that and 10 questions that we can really ask ourselves to make all of this happen, Andrew Winston.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. That was a lovely introduction. I didn't even write that one, so thank you. This is an honor. Thank you so much for having me as part of the resource revolution. It is an incredibly important topic, and I think part of my job today, in part, is to explain why, or talk about why. So let me start from kind of a different place. An old friend of mine is a cardiologist, and he told me something I think very shocking. 40% of first heart attacks are fatal. Now, for many people, this is a surprise. But for some, for a lot, there were warning signs: diabetes, family history, obesity. And luckily, a lot of people act on these warning signs before it's too late. Men's Health magazine runs this regular feature they call the Belly Off Club that features someone like this man, Tom Larson, who lost 150 pounds. And every one of the articles describes what the magazine calls the wake-up call, that pivotal moment when the man realized something needs to change dramatically. He's running around with his kids and he can't breathe, or his doctor just says, you're going to die. People do change, sometimes in profound ways. They do what they need to thrive. Now, I think that we as a species and as a business community are getting wake-up calls. The first wake-up call is extreme weather, climate change. Over the last couple years, every January, Australia has had to change their weather maps to add 2 color bands to reflect temperatures ranging from 50 to 54 degrees centigrade, or up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And as Stephen Colbert, the US comedian who I turn to for insight and analysis, said, and I thought this was great, that's in January. Imagine what it's like in the summer. And this is how I know if people are with me. A little geography joke for the morning. But it is a very serious issue. Last year was the hottest on record. This is happening all over the world. Droughts that are made worse by climate change. California, Texas. Anybody know what's going on in Sao Paulo, Brazil right now? They're almost out of water. The reservoirs are down to 3-4%. These are serious issues. So we are living in a hotter time, but the message that we're getting now from business leaders, from political leaders, is that this is not about some model or future prediction to debate, that it's today. We're getting this from people like Mayor Mike Bloomberg, from the former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson. This report last year, the Risky Business Report, was profound. Said it's costing us billions, it's going to cost us hundreds of billions. The Pentagon's even talking about this as an immediate threat. The second wake-up call is a strain on resources. That's the crux of the conversation today. A couple years ago, China built 17 billion square feet of new space in 1 year. Now I want you to picture all of the commercial property in Manhattan. All the office buildings, picture all the cement, steel, glass, everything that went into it. In that 1 year, China built not 1 commercial Manhattan, but 30. That's 1 year. This relentless pressure on resources, it's very basic supply and demand, has changed the way the world works. McKinsey & Company gathered together some data on commodities, metals, energy, food, everything that goes into our economy, into our lives. Looked at the price of all of it together and said, in the 20th century, the costs dropped. When modern business grew up, It was during a time of declining input costs. You know, volatility for little things like world wars, but basically down, down, down. This century, up dramatically. We wiped out 100 years of productivity gains in just 10. Now, in the last 6 months, there's been some drops in some key commodities, so we're down a little bit. But just look at oil. This is the one everyone says, oh, it dropped dramatically, and it did. But it's still 2 to 3 times the cost at the beginning of the century. Everything is more expensive. That's the reality. We're living in a hotter, scarcer, more expensive time, but we're also living in a world that is getting more and more connected every day, allowing people to ask more questions about every company, how they operate, how supply chains work all over the world. Everything is open to public scrutiny now. Now, this isn't just someone who makes his living talking about sustainability or environmental and social issues. Every year, the world's leaders get together. These are, prime ministers, presidents, governors, city mayors. They get together in Davos, Switzerland, and they poll them every year. What are the biggest risks to the world? And if you look at this year's list from January, look at their top 10 list, it kind of falls in 3 very clear buckets. This is my groupings, but one is obviously just conflict and collapse, things like disease, anything that can just undermine society. Second is the economy, concerns about equity, unemployment. And third is this bucket that I'm talking about today, climate and resources. And really, when you look at the way they rank them, climate and resources was more important to them than the economy. It was a bigger risk. But these are all connected. These are all really the same sets of issues. The unrest in Syria, the Middle East over the recent years, was in large part because of changes in weather, changes in the prices of food. These are connected issues. So my core message, really, is that these mega challenges are enormous risks. They are. But they are also huge opportunities. That this is now part of how business operates in a fundamental way. This isn't some side issue. This is not philanthropy. This is not corporate social responsibility, really. This is about, can your business thrive? Can it survive? Can it operate? If your input prices are rising, if your consumers want more from you, if your customers are asking tougher questions, are you ready for that world? And this is, according to my favorite billionaire entrepreneur, this is the greatest wealth-generating opportunity of our lives. And last year, the pivot has begun. Last year, the world spent $300 billion on just clean energy. That's a lot of money. So we are facing big issues. We're facing dragons. We need to conquer them. We need to change how we operate, how our lives work, how we do business. We have to be heroes, individually and as companies and as cities. My job in the world, in part, is to give people tools, to try to give them a sword. And my contribution right now is a set of frameworks, strategies, tactics, this big pivot. And what does that mean? What is the big pivot? I'm not going to go into all these details. We have limited time. There's in the book, I've got kind of 10 strategies. The core of what I want to talk about is what's called the vision pivot in the middle. A little bit of a typo, but it's the vision pivot. It's about how do we see the world? How do we ask questions? What's the heretical questions, the tough questions we need to ask? How do we set our goals? And we're fighting this kind of short-term pressure. Now, all of this combined is about building resilient systems, resilient cities, resilient companies, resilient people. Now, I live in the New York City area, and Hurricane Sandy hit a few years ago, and it kind of drove me to write this book. We learned how fragile we really are. The seas rushed into lower Manhattan, and the heart of the financial world went dark for 4 days because a part of the electric grid, a transponder, exploded. Now, call me crazy, but I think if your electric grid explodes when it's wet, it's not resilient. It's not very flexible. And we're realizing now we need to move away from old technologies, ancient fuels. Countries, continents are realizing that they're too dependent on old ways. Europe has realized that 1/3 of its coal, oil, and natural gas comes from this man. This is my favorite picture of any world leader in history. I'm hoping the governor might come up and get on a horse, and it's just remarkable, right? So, this is a despot controlling a huge portion of the energy. This is why Germany and Switzerland and others are trying to move off of fossil fuels as quick as they can. My work is with the private sector, though. Companies are also waking up to the benefits of radically reducing their resource use and moving to renewable sources. Walmart is the largest buyer of solar power in the country outside of the military. And when they announced a couple years ago that they were going to increase their renewable energy another 600%, One of the top executives said, hey, this keeps our stores up and running, no matter how bad the weather is or who else might be down. That's resilience. We can sell stuff. This is competitive. So imagine if your business didn't have to care what the cost of energy was or oil. This is resilience, protecting your money, making more money. But to do this, to pivot, we need to change how we set goals. Now, I want you to imagine if we were all in a boat together and it was filling with water. What we would not do is say, hey, how much do you feel like you can bail today? And then maybe set a stretch target from there. No, we'd figure out how much do we need to bail to stay afloat. And we now know on a bunch of big issues how fast we need to go. On carbon in particular, PwC has used the numbers from the global scientific community and tells us we need to decarbonize the economy. That's the amount of carbon for every dollar of GDP by over 6% a year. We're going at about 1% per year right now. That's fast, but there are a lot of companies. The pivot has begun. This is just some of the companies that have committed to 100% renewable energy. A couple of them are already there. Apple, all their data centers in the US are powered by renewable energy, 100%. These are big targets, and there's big buying going on. On the waterfront, the science-based goal is to deal with the fact that water is not abundant in many places. It's in water-stressed regions. Companies are under threat. Their operations are under threat. So Coke, which relies a little bit on liquid for its products, has said we're going to replenish all the water that we use. This is the kind of goal that drives business, drives change. Ford looked at the climate change goals for the world starting almost 10 years ago and said, this is going to change how we think about our products. We're going to innovate around this. We're going to do new engines, more efficient engines, biofuels, electrification. And it drove them to announce last year that the Ford F-150 truck for 2015 would be 700 pounds lighter as they move from steel to aluminum. That's a resource revolution. And this is their number one selling product. This is not a small niche part of their business. And that is heretical to ask, can we change our core product, make it more efficient? But it's not the most heretical thing you can do in cars, right? Tesla's asking an even deeper question. Do we need an internal combustion engine? That's the kind of question we need to ask as well. There are companies asking tough questions about their entire business. CVS last year said, we're going to stop selling tobacco. Now, this was $2 billion in sales out of $120 billion, and a lot in the press said, oh, it's only $2 billion, which told me those reporters had not worked in a company, maybe, because $2 billion is $2 billion, right? That was not a small issue. This was brave. But the question they really asked, I think, is can we stop selling products that don't fit our mission, our strategy of health? We have clinics in the back of the store. How can we sell tobacco in the front? Can we stop selling things that are not part of a prosperous, thriving future? The pivot has begun. Utilities are waking up to the pressure towards the clean economy. That 100% target on renewable energy means those companies are not going to buy traditional energy anymore. E.ON in Germany is spinning off its fossil fuel assets to become a renewable energy company. Here in the US, NRG has said we're going to cut carbon, and they are 70% coal today. We're going to cut carbon 90% by 2050. That's the science-based target. So can we sell less of the things that are not good for the future? On the flip side, can we sell more of the things that are? Kingfisher is a Home Depot in Europe. Actually, they'd probably like it if I said Home Depot was the Kingfisher in the US, but they're a home store, and they have set a goal to be net positive, meaning they want to help people build buildings that generate more energy than they use, so that the existence of the products they sell improve the world. This is possible today. This is a building in Seattle that generates more energy than it needs. But the deepest heresy of all is probably challenging the nature of consumption, asking questions about why do we buy the things we do, and can we use less, and talking to your own customers about using less. This is a map of a floor plan of an office building. Each one of those little boxes is a printer. So this story goes back a few years, but it's a great one. This is Xerox. What they realized was this was not tenable. Congratulations, market saturation. Okay, there's a printer everywhere. But companies were going to want to save paper, energy, time. They were going to want to move away from this. So Xerox helped this company map out a different path to this many boxes of multifunction devices. Now, of course, they said, buy them from us. This was sales. But what are they really doing? They're saying, what if we ask our customers to actually use less printing? We're going to help you do it. And when I talked to the CEO about it, I said, how can you justify this? And she said, well, Ursula Burns, she said, well, it's better if we do it than somebody else, right? That's the bottom line of a resource revolution. It's happening at the customer level too. The B2B conversation's a little easier, but it's really hard to have this at the customer level. Patagonia's always been out front on this. And they've been asking people the question, do you really need that jacket that you have? They've said to the world, we want to make gear that lasts a long time. You don't buy what you don't need. And they ran an ad a couple years ago that said, don't buy this jacket. Can you imagine? Don't buy our product. And they've actually grown while doing it because their products are the best, right? So you have companies pushing the boundary of what it means to even be a company, asking questions about purpose, tying what they do to larger ideas like bringing water and energy to the developing world, or like Unilever does with their Lifebuoy soap brand, helping people wash hands, teaching kids how to wash hands to avoid easily transmittable diseases that kill millions of kids before age 5. Now, I said earlier this wasn't about philanthropy. Now, and these kinds of stories sound like they are. And of course, there's an element of doing the right thing. But what this is really about, at core, if you take a hard look at it, is that there's a good business story here. Because if we don't bring water and energy to people, they can't buy computers, they can't buy shampoo. If you don't help kids survive easily transmittable diseases, they can't grow up to be a part of society and contribute. And they can't buy your stuff. This is about a very core idea. Business cannot thrive unless the planet and people thrive as well. We are not separate. So I ask you, how are you going to challenge how you normally do things, how business operates, how your lives work? What's your heresy? How will you be the hero in this story that we're building and telling? And what if the answers built our future? Because they do. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Some fascinating questions. Andrew, thank you very much. One of the great things about listening to speakers is discovering something that you didn't realize fit into the concept that you thought about. And suddenly, I didn't realize that pictures of bare-chested world leaders would influence our ability to handle resources and where we take the world. But there's so much to be considered from the public sector in terms of what we do and where we go. And Hurricane Sandy, which Andrew touched upon as well, certainly for those of us who live on the East Coast and have read about it, was a transforming event and an eye-opening event for many people as well. It, for some, ceased a debate about what many others take as a given, and that is that the world is changing. It's getting hotter, and resources in many cases are getting scarcer, and we have to find a way to deal with all of that. And that's where we go from the private sector in many cases to the public sector as well, where our leaders have to stand up and lead. And we have one of the best of them with us today. Governor Ed Rendell. From a political standpoint, he's like a world champion boxer who was never defeated. 2 terms as the district attorney in Philadelphia. 2 terms then as the mayor of Philadelphia, presiding over what many consider to be one of the greatest urban transformations of our time. And take it from somebody who's lived part of his life, much of his life in Philadelphia. Those attributes, those qualities, those praises are well-deserved. And he followed that up by becoming 2-term governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, dealing with all of the issues that go with one of the most populous states in this country, infrastructure not being the least among them as well. Followed that up by not dropping out of public life at all. He is the co-founder, along with former Mayor Mike Bloomberg, of Building America's Future, an organization that takes a very close look at where we are and once again where we need to be going. So I give to you Governor Ed Rendell.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Mike, for that nice introduction, and to Bertrand and the SUEZ environmental team. Thanks for inviting me to talk about what is probably the most long-range challenge facing government today, and that's the federal government, state government, and local government. Infrastructure has been described as the least sexiest word in the English language. And there's something true about that, and we're very low on the funding pecking order. because people don't foresee infrastructure as having immediate needs. Oh yes, when a bridge collapses and people die, there's a rush to do something about our infrastructure, which lasts for 30, maybe 45 days and then dissipates. But infrastructure is a way. Look, America's been blessed with the most abundant set of natural resources of, I think, any country in the world. And yet the key to effectively using those resources is infrastructure. Our infrastructure can't support the effective use of our resources. Let me give you 3 quick examples. Pennsylvania is a very good state for production of wind energy. We're a mountainous state, the most mountainous state east of the Mississippi, and there are lots of wind farms cropping up all over Pennsylvania. But our electrical grid isn't built out enough to support going to where those mountains are. So we can't effectively use all of our wind capacity. Ports. We're blessed with 2 enormous coastlines, which make it easy to ship goods from Asia and Europe to our ports. And as many of you know, the Panama Canal is being deepened to allow these super tankers, which used to have to unload in Long Beach and then have their goods trucked or trained to the East Coast. They're going to allow those Supermax tankers to go through the canal and come up to the eastern seaboard. But only 2 of the 12 major ports on the eastern seaboard are dredged sufficiently to allow those super tankers to come into their ports and unload. And as a result, much of that cargo is going to unload in Canada, taking with it tens of thousands of well-paying trucker and longshoreman jobs. Superstorm Sandy, it was alluded to, showed us that our infrastructure is extremely vulnerable. Extremely vulnerable because we don't invest and because we don't use common sense. When New York, Lower Manhattan flooded and the subways went out for days because they were flooded and caused electrical shortages and outs in the subways. People started looking at how do we protect the subways? And in places in Asia and Europe that are flood prone, they build the subways up. Instead of walking downstairs to get into a subway, which lends itself to when water comes going right down those stairs, they make you walk up a few steps before you get into the subways, and then you walk down, and that's just enough to make sure that the water doesn't come in. But not only we fail to invest in our infrastructure, we fail to protect it in some basic ways. Now, our water infrastructure is enormously important. Our water, our stormwater, our wastewater infrastructure, enormously important to the country. But it's very low in the pecking order, well below roads, bridges, and highways. Not that we're doing much for roads, bridges, and highways either. But it's very low. And consider, to juxtapose water infrastructure with highway infrastructure, that there are 30 times as many pipelines, length of pipelines in this country, water that deliver water, as there are miles in the interstate highway system. 30 times. And those pipes have become extraordinarily vulnerable. They're vulnerable because, like many of us, they're getting old, or in fact, they're really old. One year when I was mayor of Philadelphia, we had 45 straight days where the temperature was below 30 degrees. Everything froze. It snowed, and the snow and the ice stayed on the ground for a month and a half. But on the 46th day, it was 60 degrees. On the 47th day, it was 65 degrees. And 54 significant water mains burst in Philadelphia during those 2 days. Why did they burst? Well, I brought our water folks in and our managers in after those 2 days, and I asked them, and they said, Mayor, many of those pipes were laid in the 19th century. In the 19th century, that's the 1800s. Now, that's not something that's unique to Philadelphia. It's prevalent in most older northeastern and midwestern cities. And water mains bursting is not unique to Philadelphia either. Each year, 24,000 water mains burst in the United States. That's 1 every 2 minutes. But we don't always lose water because of old pipes that burst. We lose them because of old, improperly implemented pipes that leak. leakage is an enormous problem in the American water infrastructure. We lose 1.7 trillion gallons of water every year because of leakage. To give you a frame of reference for that, that's 4.5 years of all of the water that the 8 million people and the visitors to New York City use. 4.5 years we lose in 1 year. 25% of all treated water in this country is wasted because of leakage. It never hits its intended recipients. Think about that. So we have a real crisis in our water system. And it's estimated that in the next 25 years, the American Society of Civil Engineers, which incidentally graded our water infrastructure as a solid D, at least we didn't get an F, we were a solid D, and the ASCE estimates that we're going to have to spend $4.8 trillion in the next 25 years just to maintain a system in decent repair. $4.8 trillion. Well, we were talking upstairs about the difficulty in getting people to invest in infrastructure in the current political atmosphere, and I noted that Senator Corker, a Republican from Tennessee, sponsored a bill with Senator Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, to raise the gas tax 12 cents a gallon and to adjust it each year for inflation. Senator Corker could not get one Republican co-sponsor, not one. And if you consider how difficult that is, do you think the public sector is going to pay $4.8 trillion to maintain our water infrastructure? Not a chance, not a chance. Slowly but surely, some public officials are getting sensitized to the crisis, but there is no chance that the public will fill that gap. So we've got to turn to innovative private sector solutions, solutions very much like the SUEZ environment model. It's already, the SUEZ model has already been adopted by the town of Middleton, Pennsylvania, and Bayonne, New Jersey. And those were significant challenges because people instinctively react when they hear we're going to privatize something, particularly something as fundamental to their life as water. They instantly react with fear. Well, the private sector is going to really raise our prices. Or the private sector is not going to care about quality. Well, those are all legitimate hurdles to be overcome, but they're not easy to overcome. But SUEZ overcame them in Middleton and in Bayonne, winning the vote of public officials that were, in fact, talked to by some people in the public who didn't want to see change happen. Well, private sector innovation is a key to solving our water infrastructure problems if there's a reasonable, predictable return. Look, as much as we'd like to think that the private sector is going to, because of the future of the earth, and you did give us some good examples of private sector taking chances on reducing profits, but generally that doesn't happen. They need a predictable rate of return. If they get it, they'll invest because there is money to be made and because these are stable investments. No one's going to shut off water spouts for citizens, but we've got to have a predictable rate of return. Interestingly, 50% of the communities in the United States have their water systems privatized, but that only accounts for about 20% of the water that's used in the country each year, because the big cities, where political pressure is the most prevalent, where the news media is the most active in stirring things up, those big cities have been the ones that have been most reluctant to privatize their water systems. Now, if you think about it, what's one important energy source that is totally privatized, regulated by the public, but totally privatized? The infrastructure, electricity. The electricity infrastructure is totally private. It's regulated by state utility commissions, which are less subject to political whims than elected officials, and the system works. Agreed, we have some problems with the electricity infrastructure, but by and large, the system has worked. By and large, when improvements are needed, the companies go before the utility commissions and seek rate increases, and by and large, rate increases are granted. I want to close by giving you one example of where we need to go in my judgment, and it's in the city of Philadelphia. I didn't have any responsibility for this. This came in 2011, so it's impossible for me to take credit for it. But it was a very innovative and green program. The city, like 80 other big cities, has a problem fulfilling the requirements of the Clean Water Act when it comes to stormwater. And as you know, in systems that are combined sewers, there's CSO, combined sewer overflow, and the water that runs off from rainstorms gets into the sewer system and disrupts it and causes the discharge of a lot of matter that shouldn't get into the water and needs to be cleaned up and prevented. So Philadelphia, which needs to invest $1.6 billion in doing something about their system, decided to try to pass a stormwater surcharge on your water bill. Now, that's difficult to get through our city council because our city council generally has the backbone of a sponge, but and that's probably unfair to sponges. but they keyed it and made the fee green. So there was an incentive. You could get credits towards the fee by being green, by taking your land and making it more permeable. So, for example, the average homeowner in Philadelphia pays $13.80 a month for the stormwater fee. Commercial users pay a much more significant amount, but the University of Pennsylvania, which has a leafy green campus, for those of you who know it, pays $11,000 a month. The Philadelphia Airport, which is all concrete and no permeability at all, pays $126,000 a month. So there's incentives to making it work. But that predictable rate of return has allowed the city to float bonds, tax-exempt bonds, to produce $1.6 billion of private sector financing. Look, there are people who instinctively react against anything that's privatized. When I tried to privatize the Pennsylvania Turnpike, my citizens were all upset because it was an Australian company that was perceived to be the leading bidder. And I said to them, yeah, we have to worry about those Australian terrorists getting control of our turnpike, and toll takers are going to be replaced by kangaroos. We have to worry about loss of jobs. And then the winning bidder turned out to be a Spanish company by the name of Aventis, and people were up in arms. And I said, okay, everyone who's mad about this cannot fly into Orlando because Aventis runs the Orlando airport. The Orlando airport's management has been totally privatized. And Americans are starting to get it. I think the pathway to privatization, the pathway to private sector coming in and funding and running and managing things, that pathway is becoming far more open. And it is the wave of the future. But we've got to protect our infrastructure in roads and highways and bridges, in water and energy and broadband, you name it. We have to protect our infrastructure and we have to invest in it. And it's only by involving the private sector with innovative models like SUEZ Environment, it's only by doing that that we can make infrastructure the centerpiece of the resource revolution and ensure for us a safe, secure, and prosperous future. Thank you.
I think you get a sense now why Governor Rendell gets reelected so frequently. Very effective leadership. He used the word people several times, and ultimately it all comes down to people. Problems are sometimes created by people. Solutions are the thing that people wait for. It's people that ultimately is what this is all about. And our next guest, our next speaker, has dedicated his life to people, some would argue our most precious resource. Dr. Michael Lomax, an esteemed educator, college president, university professor, and the president and CEO of the United Negro College Fund, one of America's great institutions. And during his tenure, just to show how effective a leader he has been and how much good he has done, unprecedented growth at the United Negro College Fund. $1.5 billion raised, 92,000 students got their degrees because of the work that this gentleman has done. I give to you Dr. Michael Lomax.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for that gracious introduction, and I didn't write his either. It's wonderful to be here today. Now, what is a guy who spends all of his time talking to college students or asking people for money to help create more college students, what am I doing here talking about creating a resource revolution? I'm here because I'm going to talk to you about an unlimited resource, the infinite resource, the mind, and how we can bring that to bear on addressing this really sobering problem of natural resources in the 21st century. Andrew, you talked about heretical thinking. You talked about making the big pivot. You talked about innovation. I represent an organization which has been heretical, has been innovative and tried to make the big pivot. We're founded in 1944, but I want to go back a couple of years even before that. And we were founded in a place which would seem very unlikely to produce a great educational institution. We were founded in rural Macon County, Alabama, in the Black Belt, at an institution called Tuskegee Institute. There may be some in that vast world out there who know about Tuskegee, founded by Booker T. Washington in 1881 to educate former slaves. The president at the time in 1930s was a guy named Frederick Douglass Patterson, and he had a big idea. He said in rural Macon County, Alabama, that black people should learn how to fly. And he went to Washington and he petitioned the Department of Defense to allow Tuskegee Institute to get rid of some cotton fields and pave an airstrip and build an aviation program, a commercial aviation program. But by the time he got the ability to do it, the country was about to enter war, and he said, let's make this a defense aviation program. And let's do something really heretical. Let's have African Americans not just fight on land and on sea, but let's have them fight in the air. And that big idea, that heretical idea, that innovative idea, that pivot produced the Tuskegee Airmen, one of the great fighting forces of World War II. 1944, the end of the war. Men and women, African Americans who for the first time had gotten to be involved in the war industries and had fought in the air and on the sea and on land in Europe and in the Southeast Asia, were going to come home, and he said, they've got to get an education for the 20th century. And he challenged all of the black college presidents to come together and create a United Negro College fundraising organization to help pay for their educations. He enlisted business, John D. Rockefeller Jr., to lead the first campaign. They raised $750,000 in that first campaign, and they've raised $4.3 billion in the 71 years since then, and helped over 400,000 students get an education, a college education. Now, the big heretical idea was that black people could get college educations and should. And as important as that was in 1944, it is absolutely essential in 2015. Not just that African Americans, but that all people of color, not just that low-income African Americans, but all first-generation Americans and people all around the globe have the opportunity, an equal opportunity, to get the kinds of educations that will make them not just competitive in the workforce in the 21st century, but to help solve the big problems. Because as finite as the resources are, the mind is infinite. And we don't know where the next big idea will come that will solve one of the resource problems that we face in the United States and around the globe. And let me tell you, we've got to do some work there, and the work will be hard because the challenge is immense. Today, in this country alone, we are doing such an unacceptable job producing college-ready high school graduates. And that's why anyone who is concerned about making sure that we have the workforce of the future says, first and foremost, we've got to make sure that our kids get the kind of education which will enable them to get the college education that they need, the advanced skills, the technological know-how that will enable them to be the STEM professionals, science, technology, engineering, math of the 21st century. We can't ration out that knowledge. We've got to make sure that it's expansive. We've got to give equal opportunity to low-income kids, to women, to first-generation college graduates. So that's the new work that UNCF is doing, but we're doing it in the way that we've always done it. We're doing it in partnership with business, and that's why SUEZ has been one of our partners. SUEZ has recognized that for young people who have had no expansive educational opportunities, they've got to come into a business and see that what they learn in the classroom has application in the real world. And that's why we've built a partnership, highly competitive program for our students to intern with SUEZ. And that's an important first step in our partnership, but it's part of a larger effort that has to be undertaken around the country. Because right now, our kids are not college ready. Only 5% of African American kids in this country graduate high school. 5% prepared to take a 4-credit course in math, science, English. Only 5%, 95% don't. 14% of Latinos. 30% of whites. 60% of Asian. We got a lot of catching up to do. It seems a formidable obstacle, one that we cannot achieve. But you know, I come from a community which has taken on formidable obstacles for generations. And so as I sort of pivot to my close on this, I want to say a little bit about the reason to believe. The reason to believe that we can make this revolution. And those starkly disturbing statistics about natural resources, that we can find a way of addressing them. 50 years ago, and I want my first slide, we had a huge racial divide in this nation. Governor, you remember it. Blacks and whites lived separately and unequally. African Americans aspired in that place where I began my conversation with you about Alabama, with African Americans living in fear of violence, separated, segregated. But within that community, there was an aspiration to have full citizenship rights. And a new generation of leaders came forward, led by Martin Luther King, by John Lewis, and by nameless people that we don't even know. And they said, we can stand up for our rights. We can challenge something which seems like an intractable obstacle. And we can do this nonviolently, and we can create a revolution. 1965, Selma, Alabama. Seemed like the darkest day of many dark days in a civil rights movement. A group of 300 demonstrators try to cross a bridge. And they're not just stopped, they're beaten and assaulted. Here, John Lewis, beaten to the ground. Some predicted the end of the civil rights movement, that African Americans would never achieve their citizenship rights. Fast forward 50 years. Same bridge, some of the same people, a little older, but led across that bridge by the first African-American president of the United States. Selma wasn't the darkest day. It was the beginning, the dawning of a new day. African Americans have their full citizenship rights. This resource revolution is one to create global citizens who recognize that education is essential to prepare all of our people to compete, to work, to make productive contributions in the 21st century, address human resource issues, and connect them to the natural resource issues that we face as well. Global citizens. That's the revolution that we have to create. A global citizenry that has the skills, has the capability of addressing these big problems, and recognizes our interconnectedness and that we must invest in human resources to get the return that we seek in natural resources. President of the United States closed his remarks in Selma last Saturday with, I think, a fitting quotation to share with you here today. With effort, he said, we can roll back poverty and the roadblocks to opportunity. Americans don't accept a free ride for anyone, nor do we believe in equality of outcomes. But we do expect equal opportunity. And if we really mean it, if we're willing to sacrifice for it, then we can make sure that every child gets an education suitable to this new century. One that expands imaginations and lifts their sights and gives them skills. That's a pivot. That's a heretical idea. And that's what we have to do. And that's why UNCF, in partnership with SUEZ, steps forward to be a part of this resource revolution. Human resource, natural resource. We join with SUEZ in challenging all of us to partner to create better futures for our nation, for the world, for our children, and for the next generations. For 71 years, that's the work that UNCF has done. Our call to action, I think, is a call to action in sympathy with the resource revolution. It is to remind all of us that we must create a world in which young people, all young people, have an equal opportunity to the education that will prepare them for rich and enriched lives. Why? Because a mind is a terrible thing to waste, but a wonderful thing to invest in. Thank you.
What an inspiring presentation, and a vivid reminder that when the revolution comes, you need leadership. You need skills to make it succeed. Otherwise, it's just a rebellion. A true revolution needs somebody and somebodies to help us get to where we want to go, which leads us to our next speaker. From Kuala Lumpur to Buenos Aires, Bertrand Camus has dedicated his professional life to dealing with some of the more serious issues pertaining to water and infrastructure. And now as the CEO of SUEZ Environment North America, he's working very hard on strategies and a game plan that will get this country moving in the direction that we all know it needs to be going. And it has to for a long time. And with the commitment on the part of SUEZ and Bertrand and all of us, we will get there too. Bertrand Camus.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Dr. Lomax. Thank you, Governor Rendell. Thank you, Andrew, for those very inspiring presentation. Under the surface of the conversation today is lying a very simple truth. Humanity's relationship with the environment is reaching a turning point. Resources have depleted more during our lifetime than they had before the history that came before it. Populations are growing and are exhausting an already degraded climate and environment. Infrastructure is overburdened, obsolete, and in desperate need for investment. We talked about the fact that skills that people have today are not the ones that we will need tomorrow. Those are the facts. And if we go on in that direction, we are heading right into a resource crisis on a global scale. But the situation is not without solutions. Having personally lived and worked in several crises, from Southeast Asia in 1997, Argentina in 2001, and more recently, United States in 2008, I can tell you that opportunities exist in every crisis. I would go even further. As a wise mind told us very recently, we should not waste a crisis. And we cannot waste this crisis. It's an excellent opportunity to change. We need to move from an economy that overconsumes resources to an economy that optimizes the use and the management of the resources. But we need to go further. We need to move to an economy capable of producing the resources it needs for its development. Being able to transform waste into energy, being able to produce secondary raw materials, being able to invent solutions for the stressed areas, especially in terms of water supply. The situation calls for a revolution. And the challenge we have in front of us is as big as were the Industrial Revolution, the Public Health Revolution, or the Digital Revolution. It's time for a resource revolution. At SUEZ Environment, we have always been at the forefront of those revolutions. From the construction of the Canal of Suez in 1869, that connected Occident to Orient, to the very first use of chlorination as a water disinfectant here in the United States in 1908, or even with the first use of automated metering infrastructure in 1970, our group, SUEZ Environment, has always had innovation and progress coded in its DNA. This is our purpose. Our ambition has always been to challenge the status quo. And today, this is what we want to do. We want to lead the way from a resource crisis to a resource revolution. Change is happening. Change is everywhere. Change is here. The only question is whether change will happen to us or if change will happen by us. If change happens to us, it will be in the form of Hurricane Sandy. We will be forced to change at the hands of devastating events that displace and disrupt. But if change happens by us, we have a unique opportunity. Our generation can redefine the way communities and businesses are relating to the use of resources. And we can transform waste into wealth. This is what the resource revolution is about. It is about embracing circular economy. It's about working together collaboratively, and it's about providing tangible and concrete solutions. Change must be circular. We can dream of a world where there is no more waste, but only resources. We must bend our relationship to resource from a linear one to a circular one. We need to move from a culture of take, make, dispose to an economy of reduce, recover, and recycle. This is what we have been doing for the last 20 years with our partners in Los Angeles, the Water Basin District, where we are operating one of the most sophisticated reuse facilities in the world. We are producing 5 grades of water, going from irrigation up to human consumption standards. And over the past 20 years, we have been recycling 150 billion gallons of water. But we want to go further. The district and us have the objective to be independent from water importation from Colorado or Northern California by 2020. We want to meet the district needs only relying on local resources, conservation, and reuse. If circular means less dependent, it also means more sustainable. Take the case of the city of Edmonton in Canada. They have fixed a goal. They want to divert up to 60% of the household waste produced by their citizens and avoid to have to landfill them. There is a very strong program where household waste is being sorted out at the curbside of each household and then is transformed either into energy, recycled into secondary raw materials, or into compost. This represents each and every year the transformation of 300 million pounds of waste into wealth. But for this to work, to be able to change to this circular approach, we need to work together. We need to do it collaboratively. There is no way a change of this magnitude will happen if we are not, all of us, citizens, businesses, institutions, working in the same direction. The time when solutions could be imposed is over. Collaboration is critical. This is what happened in Nassau County, Long Island. There we have started at the beginning of the year the operation of the largest public-private partnership in the nation, providing environmental services to roughly 1.2 million inhabitants. Of course, as part of our role, we have to help restore a devastated ecosystem. We need to help repair the damages provoked by Hurricane Sandy. And we need, of course, to work on improving the resilience of the infrastructure. But there is something very unique about this partnership. It was conceived with local environmental groups. They were the one who asked for a change. They were the one who talked with the county asking for a change. They were part of the beginning of the story. They were part of the negotiation, and they are now part of the contract we have with the county. And I can tell you, a global company working with local environmentalists, this is a true innovation. As you can see, the resource revolution is happening from Los Angeles to Nassau County. It's through very concrete and tangible solutions that we are making this resource revolution happen. This is the role of a company, providing tangible and concrete solutions. The topic is global, but solutions are always local. Let's talk a little bit about infrastructure, as Governor Rendell talked about this morning. The city of Middleton, Pennsylvania, Bayonne, New Jersey. There, we found a way, teaming up with private equity, and of course with the city, we find a way to solve the infrastructure problem, rebuild the infrastructure, invest in the water and sanitation infrastructure. But in addition, we are installing smart metering technologies that will help reduce wasteful leaks and also incentivize conservation. And thanks to that, we are preserving one of our most precious good, which is water. But there is another benefit. Thanks to the transaction, we were able to restructure the financing of the municipality, and now they can project themselves in a much better future. Some water. Thank you. Thank you very much. Water is good, and we are preserving it, and we are drinking it. As you could see from all those great stories, the resource revolution is a reality. It's happening. And you could also notice that they all include the three items we have been speaking about: collaboration, concrete, and circular. Circular. We are speaking about reusing, recycling water. We are speaking about transforming waste into wealth. We are speaking about recycling and upgrading infrastructure. Collaborative. Each and every of those ventures have been co-designed, co-constructed with partners, with stakeholders, and they are still part of the project when we operate them. And finally, concrete. They are real solutions to real problems. This is what the resource revolution is about. At SUEZ Environment, we are determined to make this resource revolution a reality. We are transforming and gathering all our activities under a single banner, a single brand, with the mission to generate together a secure and resourceful future for all. We are changing our organization from a structured group around two activities, water and waste, into an integrated group that will dedicate itself to sustainably manage resources.
We are at the dawn of the resource revolution.
Dawn of the resource revolution.
Dawn of the resource revolution. The revolution starts today.
The revolution starts here.
The revolution starts with you. The revolution
Will be circular.
The revolution will be
concrete. The revolution will be
collaborative.
collaborative.
Are you ready?
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 And since every revolution
Begins at home.
all SUEZ environment
Companies are now one.
SUEZ Environnement, ready for the resource revolution.
What is at stake is nothing but the nature of our world. The way we relate with the resources we use, the water that gives us life, the food we eat, the air we breathe. This is what the resource revolution is about. I have a simple question for you. Are you ready? Because yes, ourselves at SUEZ Environment, we are ready. It's a profound moment of hope and promise, but it's only working together that we will make this resource revolution happen. Thank you very much.
Before we let Bertrand go, I do want to ask you, we had at the very beginning spoken of the big kickoff in Paris this morning. What can you tell us about that?
It's an historic moment for the group and more importantly for all the employees of the group. Just a very striking figure. Today, we are 80,000 employee group. Yesterday, only 700 of them were working under the name of SUEZ Environment. Since this morning, we are 80,000 working under SUEZ Environment name. So it's an historic moment. We all wake up very early this morning to be able to see our colleagues in Paris. Today, we are in New York, and tomorrow morning, which means late at night here in the US, 11 p.m., we will be in Beijing, in China. And of course, you can all follow the conference on internet live as you could do it today. Thank you very much.
We said at the onset that this was a historic day. We have 40 water and waste experts gathered in this room today, uniting in a single purpose to form an organization that effectively takes on this great challenge and helps to foment this resource revolution. Like Bertrand just said, it's a revolution that I think all of us would be very comfortable signing on to. For those of you who wish to continue following us at home, around the world, The hashtag on Twitter is RRTour. So please feel free. Obviously, also we'll be streaming the activities from Beijing later in the day as well. But I am so grateful to Bertrand for his inspiring words and for all of our great speakers today who give us a really holistic view at what it is that we're up against and what it is that we're capable of. We invite you, for those of you in the room, to join us in the lobby moments later. We will have refreshments, plenty of water, of course, as well. But for me personally, I thank you so much for being able to participate with you, and I wish you the very best of luck on behalf of all of us. Thank you.